Thanks for watching CBSN Minnesota. I'm Esme Murphy. We have breaking news for you this afternoon. Senator Amy Klobuchar is ending her presidential campaign. We're told from a senior campaign official that Senator Klobuchar is flying to Dallas this afternoon. She will appear at a rally in Dallas tonight where she will endorse Vice President Biden, former Vice President Joe Biden. This is a scheduled Biden rally where she will appear with former Vice President Biden, and she will endorse him at that rally. This comes after a string of disappointments for Senator Klobuchar in more diverse states. Specifically, she finished poorly in Nevada, and then in South Carolina, she actually finished sixth this past Saturday in that primary with just 3% of the vote. Then came yesterday at what was supposed to be a final pump up the vote rally in St. Louis Park High School. That rally had to be canceled. Senator Klobuchar was there. It had to be canceled because Black Lives Matter's protesters took over her rally. There were negotiations back and forth with the protesters. Clearly a disappointment to the Klobuchar campaign that they could not go forward with that rally that was scheduled for 8 o'clock last night in St. Louis Park. But the Klobuchar campaign insisting, even this morning, she had an appearance in Salt Lake City, Utah, that she was going forward. Senator Klobuchar, even this morning, talking to supporters in Utah, saying that she was going to move forward. Then we got the word that her campaign had actually suspended all activities forward from Salt Lake, that there was some kind of a technical glitch going on, and for 2 hours there was darkness from the Klobuchar campaign. Obviously something going on here, but again, a senior official is telling WCCO4 News that Senator Klobuchar has ended her presidential bid. This is before Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday is scheduled to start, obviously, Tuesday. The polls open here in Minnesota early tomorrow morning. Thousands of people have voted for Senator Klobuchar already in early voting and in early voting across other states, but she is suspending her campaign before Super Tuesday and endorsing former Vice President Joe Biden. This is a clear nod to the fact that the Democratic Party is deeply divided right now, and there is a move afoot to block Senator Bernie Sanders, who is much more progressive, much more liberal, and for the moderates to consolidate around Joe Biden, who had a blowout landslide win in South Carolina. We will keep you updated and posted throughout the day here on CBSN Minnesota and on WCCO4 News. But again, Senator Amy Klobuchar suspending her campaign. She is flying to Dallas this afternoon, and she will appear at a rally with former Vice President Joe Biden and endorse him tonight. Stunning developments here. Keep it here on WCCO4 News and CBSN Minnesota. I'm Esme Murphy for CBSN Minnesota.
We have other breaking news, and this is coming to us from the campaign trail. Anna, I want to talk to you about this. Amy Klobuchar's campaign now confirming to NBC News the senator is going to be flying to Dallas, here to Texas, to join Vice President Biden at his rally tonight. She will suspend her campaign for the presidency and endorse the vice president. Anna, there had been tremendous pressure, people questioning what is your path forward. Increased the pressure even more, I think, last night when you saw Pete Buttigieg, who was ahead of her in votes, certainly in delegates, who decided that the best thing for him to do was step aside. What's the impact here?
I think it's pretty big, actually. I think what you're really starting to see is that this field condensing a bit, which we've been predicting was going to happen, but it was hard to see how long some of these candidates were going to stay in the race. Obviously, Minnesota, a big Super Tuesday state, Amy Klobuchar's hometown state. So her impact of throwing her support behind Joe Biden clearly could have an impact in that state where she was leading in a lot of the polls leading up to Tuesday. I think the other thing that's clear here is you see the consolidation of the moderates and really the enthusiasm around Joe Biden versus Mike Bloomberg. A week or two ago, Mike Bloomberg seemed like he had a lot of momentum behind him, but right now Joe Biden is really cleaning up when it comes to money and also when it comes to some of these endorsements.
Yeah, and Klobuchar's decision comes as we've been waiting. We know that there have been conversations between Pete Buttigieg and the vice president. There was a lot of speculation. Would he do the same thing? Would he endorse the vice president? The word last night was from folks inside his campaign said, he wants to sleep on it, but you wonder what might be next.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Joe Biden said on that phone call that he would like him to stay engaged. Clearly, there is a momentum on the moderate side that they want to coalesce all of the energy possible to stop Bernie Sanders, who is expected to have a big night on Tuesday, but they are trying to stop him from having an overwhelming lead so that there is still a path forward for someone like Joe Biden. So the question really, I think, remains, what happens with Pete Buttigieg? What happens with Mike Bloomberg? Do they see a path forward for themselves, or do they say, hey, it's time to actually get behind Joe Biden and put him forward as the best candidate to try to beat Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, I think the obvious question is, where do those voters go, right? Are they all naturally, or most of them going to go to the vice president? How much does an endorsement from your candidate influence you? But there's a second part of this, and I'm thinking about Pete Buttigieg in particular. Last year, and I don't have the figure off the top of my head, but he raised tens of millions of dollars. He had incredibly impressive bundlers, particularly for someone who a year ago, by his own admission in his speech last night, his name wasn't even known. People couldn't pronounce his name. So the other question is, where will that big money go? Because we know how far behind Joe Biden is. Obviously, everybody's far behind Michael Bloomberg, but far behind Bernie Sanders, who had an unbelievable fundraising month in February.
Absolutely. I mean, Joe Biden has had a good night. I think it was $10 million since South Carolina overnight. And so I think the question is going to be, can he keep that momentum going? Will that super PAC money, will some of those big donors shift over to him? Because he's going to need it. At the end of the day, people don't like to say this because it is about the voters, but it really is about the money. Will Joe Biden have the ability to be up on air in some of these key states? Will he be able to hire more staff? That's one of the big questions has been, he's been understaffed in a lot of these early states. And so can he bring some of those supporters of potentially Amy Klobuchar's, potentially Pete Buttigieg's and others to coalesce behind him and really have that infrastructure, because that is so important when it comes to actually getting out the vote. In terms of some of these congressional endorsements, how can they translate that into action on the ground?
Give me the view from Joe Biden.
Well, Nicole, I mean, it's just been sort of a whiplash period for all of us following the Biden campaign. A week ago at this point, we were about to release a poll that showed Joe Biden in single digits with just a single-digit lead over Bernie Sanders in South Carolina. And if that was true and if that held, there were a lot of folks on the Biden campaign who didn't think they'd even be around for Super Tuesday at that point. And all of a sudden, we're in a situation where this is just party is beginning to coalesce around him in a big way so quickly that it's hard to keep our heads on straight here. What's interesting is I even just talking to the vice president in some private moments before we began the interview, there's a focus and sort of a calm around him that I haven't even seen in him in a while. I asked him to talk about, the fact that we saw Mayor Pete drop out, his conversation with him last night. He said that he encouraged him to stay involved in the race. He was coy about whether he asked for his endorsement. I asked him about whether he's involved personally in efforts to try to consolidate the rest of the field around him, whether on the eve of Super Tuesday he was talking to the likes of Amy Klobuchar or others. This was 10 minutes before, by the way, the word would leak out that Amy Klobuchar was, of course, going to endorse him and join him tonight. And I have to tell you, Nicole, that I wasn't planning to go to Dallas tonight. He has one more event here. We were going to skip ahead to California to be in position for Super Tuesday, where he's going to be tomorrow. But the Biden team across the board has been strongly encouraging me to join there tonight. It's almost like they're building an Avengers sequel in Dallas tonight. And so we're interested in what's about to happen. But there's clearly an interest on the part of many in the party, and by the way, including potentially even President Obama himself, to try to hurry this race to a finish. There's a lot of conversations that have been happening, including some involving the president himself, that suggest they don't want to wait for Super Tuesday. They want to begin this process as soon as they can.
Well, you just dangled something really riveting in front of me. Well, tell me more about the conversations with former President Obama. Is that what you said?
Well, we know that the former vice president talked to him over the weekend. Yeah, we know that the former vice president talked to him over the weekend. And that, Craig Melvin asked Biden last week about why President Obama wasn't sending more smoke signals up in terms of his support for Joe Biden. And Joe Biden again said to me today that he said, I know you don't believe it, but I really did ask the president not to endorse me. He wanted to be able to show that that he earned this on his own right, on his own merits. But when you saw last week President Obama's lawyers react to the TV ad that was being run in South Carolina that used his own audio, that's a step that they hadn't necessarily been taking. That was potentially a smoke signal. We know that he's been also working the phone lines, potentially speaking with other candidates as well. There's a way that President Obama could have an impact on this race without ever explicitly saying the words about what he wants to happen. And I think that's a lot of Democrats are taking those signals. You know, for instance, we see Susan Rice is a person who, when she comes out today and announces she's endorsing, as somebody who covered the Obama administration and knows how close they are, that's something that I don't think happens unless there's sort of a spirit around the president suggesting that that's an outcome he's happy to see.
And we just put up her tweet. That's right. I mean, having worked for a president who I think only endorsed in the messy Republican primary because his brother was running, George W. Bush endorsed Jeb Bush. I know how reluctant they are because they think they can play a role in bringing the two halves together. But you're right. There's a whole bunch of there are a whole bunch of sort of sub-presidential endorsement things. And any outreach to Michelle Obama, it's my understanding that Jill Biden and Michelle Obama had a pretty close rapport.
They absolutely have a very close relationship. I haven't heard necessarily about any outreach between those, but I know that they're still in touch regularly, as by the way, Obama and Biden have been as well. So, but it's worth paying attention to. I think these kind of signals coming out. Harry Reid is another endorsement coming out today that. You know, he was also somebody with a close relationship with President Obama in the White House.
All right, Vaughn Hilliard.
Actually, one more thing, Nicole, I should
Mike.
mention.
Yeah.
One other thing, and just in terms of the tea leaf reading that we're doing a lot of right now, when I asked the vice president in my interview with him earlier today about whether or not he thinks Obama would have to step up sooner than the convention in order to help unite the party, he said that he knows that the president wants to do that, that he thinks he'll be there when he needs to. But Biden also said something important, and I think that what we're seeing over the last few days, which is he needs to be the one to also be the figure who can ultimately unite the party, and he intends to do that, he said.
I want to ask you, Vaughn Hilliard, you know, short of a Barack Obama endorsement, a Pete Buttigieg endorsement is pretty darn good. He gave one of the most eloquent and elegant speeches last night I've ever heard for someone coming short of a dream of winning his party's nomination. How did he arrive at the sequencing of withdrawing from the race last night and making the endorsement, as we expect, as other news organizations have reported, he's expected to do tonight?
Yeah, there's a private plane set up just down the road at the South Bend Airport, destined for Dallas here this evening. He would be joining Amy Klobuchar. I talked to multiple campaign officials who said, look, the path to winning the nomination was very, very narrow. And this was an individual who got in to the race hoping that he could be a different sort of candidate, play a different sort of politics. If you're looking for an exact opposite of Donald Trump, you find that in Pete Buttigieg. But it came to that point where, and we should note, outside of drawing contrast with Bernie Sanders and, of course, a little squabble with Amy Klobuchar on the debate stage in Nevada, you haven't heard Pete Buttigieg go after the former vice president pretty much the entirety of this 2020 year, which when you're looking at back, it was the morning of the Nevada primary that I'll go back to. I had a conversation with Pete Buttigieg, and he told me that there was a reality that we all, the party, could be waking up on the morning of March 4th, this Wednesday, the day after Super Tuesday, with Bernie Sanders holding an insurmountable delegate lead. He needed to perform well among communities of color in Nevada and South Carolina. He did not. In terms of having a permission structure to go beyond, the campaign realized they did not have that. They were no longer second in national delegate count. And when you were looking, frankly, at the congressional districts around the country, it just wasn't there for them. And so when you're having that conversation over generational contrasts, Pete Buttigieg, Nicole, like to say on the campaign trail, the Democrats who have won the presidency over the last 50 years were all younger candidates who all had a different style of politics. So now it's going to be on Pete Buttigieg to go and make the case on behalf of 78-year-old Joe Biden.